Commander Zektar stared at the datapad in his four-fingered hands. The metal felt cold against his gray skin. 3 years had passed since the war ended, but the memories still burned in his mind like acid. He did not want this assignment. He did not want to remember. The message from High Command was simple. Train the new officers. Teach them about human warfare. Make them understand why the hegemony had signed a peace treaty with a species they should have crushed in weeks. Z-E-K TARS. Quarters aboard the flagship Eternal Dominion were quiet. Too quiet. He could hear the soft hum of the ship's engines, the distant chatter of crew members in the corridors. Normal sounds, safe sounds. Nothing like the screaming chaos of battle against humans. He touched the datapad screen with one clawed finger. The first file opened. New Dakota Colony. The place where everything went wrong. The holographic display filled the air above his desk. Star charts. Tactical data. Enemy positions. All of it looked so clean and organized now. So simple. Zektar remembered thinking the same thing 3 years ago. When he first saw these reports, the humans had settled New Dakota only 50 standard years before the war began. It was a farming world. Grain fields stretched across the main continent. Small towns dotted the landscape like tiny insects. The population was barely 2 million souls. According to hegemony intelligence, the planet had minimal defenses. A few orbital platforms, maybe 100 ground troops, some old mining equipment converted into crude weapons. The kind of target a junior commander might use for training exercises. Zektar had been anything but junior. He commanded the 3rd Battle Fleet, 12 dreadnoughts, 40 cruisers, over 300 support ships. His forces had conquered 17 worlds for the hegemony. He was known throughout the fleet as the Hammer of Worlds. The mission briefing had been routine. Establish orbital control. Eliminate resistance. Prepare the planet for hegemony colonization. Standard procedure. Nothing special about it except that these were humans, and humans were new to galactic politics. First contact with humanity had happened only 200 years ago. They were young, inexperienced. Their technology was decades behind hegemony standards. Their ships were slow and clumsy. Their weapons barely scratched hegemony armor. Most species would have submitted after seeing the size of Zektar's fleet. The smart ones would have negotiated. The proud ones would have fought one glorious battle and then surrendered with honor. Intact, humans did neither. Zek single quotes Tar activated the battle recordings. The holographic display showed New Dakota from orbit. Green and blue and brown, beautiful in its own way. He zoomed in on the main continent where the human defenses were concentrated. Commanding officer was Colonel Jake Martinez, age 43, a veteran of the human colony wars. His second in command was Major Amy Sullivan, younger but with a reputation for tactical thinking. According to the files, they had only 800 regular troops and maybe 2,000 militia against his 12,000 elite hegemony soldiers. The recording showed the opening phase of the assault. Zektar's ships moved into position around the planet. Energy shields glowing. Weapons powered up. The sight should have terrified any reasonable species into immediate surrender. Instead, the humans began broadcasting on all frequencies. Not surrender terms. Not desperate pleas for mercy. They were playing music. Loud, chaotic, angry music with words Zektar could not understand, but somehow felt in his moans. What are they doing? His tactical officer had asked during the real battle. Zektar had not known then. He understood now. They were preparing to die, and they wanted to die loudly. The assault began according to hegemony doctrine. Orbital bombardment of strategic targets. Landing craft filled with assault troops. Air support sweeping the skies. Clear of resistance. Everything by the book. The human defenders fell back from their outer positions. This was normal, expected, smart tactics against superior force. Zektar had seen it 1,000 times on 100 worlds. First, you retreat to stronger positions. Then you negotiate from a position of some strength. Then you surrender with your honor mostly intact, but something was wrong with the retreat. The humans were not falling back to defensible positions. They were falling back to population centers, to schools and hospitals and homes. Sir, his intelligence officer had reported, the humans are placing military assets inside civilian areas. This was against all civilized rules of war. You kept soldiers and civilians separate. You protected the innocent. You fought clean battles between professional armies. This was how intelligent species conducted warfare. Zektar paused the recording. His hands were shaking slightly. Even now, 3 years later, the memory made his blood run cold. He had thought. The humans were being cowardly, using their own people as shields. He had been wrong. Terribly, completely wrong. The humans were not using civilians as shields. They were turning civilians into soldiers. Every farmer became a sniper. Every teacher became a bomb maker. Every child became a scout. The recordings showed what happened next. Zektar's forces landed outside the main city. Standard procedure. Surround the enemy. Cut off supply lines. Force a surrender through siege tactics. Instead, the siege became a nightmare. Human attacks came from everywhere and nowhere. A school bus filled with explosives rammed a hegemony tank column. Children threw rocks that somehow contained hidden sensors, marking targets for artillery strikes that came from farms miles away. Zektar watched Colonel Martinez on the recorded communications. The human officer looked tired, but not defeated. When offered terms for surrender, he had said something that still echoed in Zektar's mind. Surrender? Tell your commander that we did not come this far to give up now. If he wants our world, he can take it one body at a time. Major Sullivan had been standing beside Martinez. She looked directly at the camera and smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. It was the smile of someone who knew a secret. A terrible secret. Zektar closed the recording. He could not watch what came next. Not yet. He needed time to prepare himself for those memories. For the moment when he learned what humans were truly capable of when they decided to fight. Outside his quarters, the ship continued its peaceful journey through space. Soon he would have to face young officers eager to learn about war. He would have to explain to them why the mighty hegemony had made peace with a species they should have conquered easily. He would have to teach them about the human way of war, and hope they never had to experience it firsthand. Zektar forced himself to continue watching the recordings. His junior officers would arrive in 2 hours for their first lesson. They needed to understand what really happened on New Dakota. They needed to know why the hegemony had learned to fear a species with inferior weapons and smaller ships. The holographic display showed the beginning of the ground assault. Everything looked perfect. Zektar's forces had complete control of the skies. His ships blocked any chance of escape. 12,000 elite hegemony soldiers were landing in perfect formation around the human city. According to every military manual in the galaxy, the battle should have ended in 6 hours. Maybe less. The first landing zone was outside the city. Limits: open farmland with good visibility. No cover for enemy forces. Textbook assault positioning. Zektar watched his younger self coordinate the attack from orbit. He remembered feeling confident, almost bored. The human response was immediate, but seemed hopeless. Small groups of soldiers fired on the landing craft with primitive weapons. The shots bounced harmlessly off hegemony armor. A few humans tried to use shoulder-mounted rockets, but the explosions barely scratched the assault vehicles. Minimal resistance. his tactical officer had reported. Estimate complete control within 4 standard hours. Zektar had nodded. Everything was going according to plan. The humans were fighting bravely, but uselessly. Soon they would see the hopelessness of their situation and surrender. This was how civilized warfare worked. Then something changed. The recording showed a group of human soldiers retreating from an impossible position. They were led by Sergeant Ben Clark, a young human with dirt on his face and determination in his eyes. His unit was completely outgunned. They should have surrendered or died where they stood. Instead, they did something Zektar had never seen before. Clark's soldiers fell back to a farming complex, not to make a last stand, but to gather supplies. They moved through the buildings like they owned them, grabbing tools and equipment. Then they disappeared into underground tunnels that had not shown up on any hegemony scan. Where did they go? Zektar's ground commander had asked over the communications. The answer came 20 minutes later. The farming complex exploded. But not from hegemony weapons. The humans had turned fertilizer and fuel into bombs. The explosion took out an entire hegemony squad and destroyed 2 assault vehicles. But that was just the beginning. More explosions followed across the landing zone. The humans were using their own infrastructure as weapons. Grain silos became bombs. Irrigation systems became delivery methods for poisonous chemicals. Even livestock was somehow weaponized. Zektar watched his forces struggle to understand what was happening. They had trained to fight armies. Professional soldiers with standard equipment following predictable tactics. The humans were doing none of those things. A farmer driving a harvesting machine charged straight at a hegemony tank. The machine was destroyed instantly, but somehow it had been filled with explosives. The tank survived, but was disabled. Before the crew could escape, human children emerged from hiding places and threw small devices that stuck to the tank's armor. More explosions. "Sir," his intelligence officer had reported, voice shaking, "the enemy appears to be using non-military personnel in combat operations. This violated every rule of civilized warfare. You did not involve civilians. You did not turn farmers into soldiers. You did not use children as combatants. It was barbaric. Insane. It was also terrifyingly effective. The humans were not fighting like any species in hegemony records. When their communications were jammed, they used hand signals and light flashes. When their weapons were destroyed, they made new ones from scrap metal and chemicals. When their positions were overrun, they simply appeared somewhere else and continued fighting. Colonel Martinez coordinated the defense from a mobile command post. Zektar watched him move through the city like a ghost, always one step ahead of hegemony forces. Major Sullivan worked beside him, her tactical mind turning every building into a fortress and every street into a trap. But it was Captain Lisa Rodriguez who showed Zektar the true horror of fighting humans. Rodriguez commanded a small outpost on the edge of the city. Her position guarded a supply depot that the humans needed to continue their resistance. When Zektar's forces surrounded the outpost, she should have surrendered. She had only 30 soldiers against 300 elite hegemony troops. The recording showed Rodriguez talking to her soldiers. Her voice was calm, almost peaceful. She was not giving orders for a last stand. She was saying goodbye. "Tell my daughter I kept my promise," she said into her communicator. Then she looked at her soldiers. "Anyone who wants to leave can go now. No shame in it, but I am staying." None of them left. Zektar watched his forces close in on the outpost. Standard siege tactics. Overwhelming firepower. The building should have fallen in minutes. Rodriguez had no heavy weapons. No way to call for support. No chance of victory. She was not trying to win. The outpost held for 3 hours. Rodriguez and her soldiers used every trick they could think of. They turned furniture into barricades. They used mirrors to blind hegemony soldiers with reflected sunlight. They threw rocks to trigger motion sensors and waste ammunition. When the building finally began to collapse, Rodriguez made her final transmission. This is Captain Rodriguez to all human forces. The depot must not fall into enemy hands. I am implementing final protocol. Tell my family I love them. Zektar had been watching from orbit. He saw the explosion that destroyed the entire supply depot. Rodriguez had somehow rigged the building to blow up with enough force to take out half a city block. The explosion killed her and all her soldiers. It also killed 200 hegemony troops and destroyed 12 assault vehicles. But that was not what terrified Zektar. What terrified him was Rodriguez's face in the final seconds before the explosion. She was not afraid. She was not angry. She was satisfied. Like she had won some kind of victory by dying. The recording continued, but Zektar paused it. His hands were shaking again. He stood up and walked to the window of his quarters. Space looked peaceful, quiet, empty of the chaos he had witnessed on New Dakota. He understood now why High Command wanted the new officers trained. They needed to learn about human psychology, about a species that became more dangerous when cornered, not less, about creatures that could turn losing into winning simply by refusing to accept defeat. Zektar looked at his reflection in the window. His younger self had thought he was fighting soldiers. He had been wrong. He had been fighting something much worse. He had been fighting humans who believed that some things were worth dying for. And that belief made them nearly impossible to defeat. The door chimed. His students were arriving early. Zektar took a deep breath and turned back to his desk. Time to teach them about the nightmare of fighting an enemy that would rather die than lose. The first students filed into Zektar's briefing room. Young officers with bright eyes and confident postures. They reminded him of himself before the war. Before he learned what humans could do when pushed into a corner, Zektar activated the main display. A star map appeared showing 12 systems. All of them had been battlegrounds during the human hegemony war. All of them had taught him something terrible about human nature. The war did not end on New Dakota, he told his students. New Dakota was where we first encountered human tactics. What happened next showed us these tactics were not accidents. They were not desperate choices made by cornered soldiers. They were the human way of war. The young officers leaned forward in their seats. One of them, Sub-Commander Veltok, raised a tentacle. Sir, surely you exaggerate. No species would deliberately choose such wasteful methods. The casualty rates must have been unacceptable. Zektar touched a control. The display showed casualty figures from the first 6 months of war. Human losses were indeed massive, 3 times higher than hegemony casualties in most battles. Any rational species would have sued for peace within weeks. You are correct about the numbers, Zektar said. You are wrong about their meaning. Humans do not calculate acceptable losses the way we do. For them, the only unacceptable loss is surrender. He activated another recording. This one showed the mining world of Kepler-7, a brown and gray planet, covered in extraction facilities and worker settlements. The kind of place that should have fallen quickly to hegemony forces. The human commander was Lieutenant Kyle Barnes, young for his rank, but with eyes that had seen too much combat already. He commanded only 47 Marines against Zektar's full brigade, 2,000 elite soldiers with heavy weapons and orbital support. Standard military psychology suggests that a 40-1 disadvantage should result in immediate surrender. Zektar explained to his students. Watch what Barnes actually did. The recording showed the opening phase of the battle. Zektar's forces landed near the main mining complex and began their advance. Barnes and his Marines held defensive positions around the central processing plant, A textbook last stand scenario. The fighting began at dawn. Hegemony forces advanced in perfect formation, weapons ready, shields powered. The humans opened fire from concealed positions. Their weapons were effective at first, but hegemony numbers quickly began to tell. Barnes's Marines fell back to secondary positions, then to tertiary positions. Each retreat cost them soldiers they could not afford to lose. By midday, they had only 23 effective fighters left. This was when any civilized commander would seek terms. Barnes did something else entirely. He ordered his remaining Marines to abandon their weapons and scatter throughout the mining complex, not to escape, to gather new equipment. Within an hour, they had somehow acquired mining explosives, industrial cutters, and heavy machinery. "Sir," one of Zektar's students interrupted, "those are not military weapons." "No, Zektar." "Agreed, they are not. But in human hands, everything becomes a military weapon." The recording showed what happened next. Barnes and his Marines began a campaign of sabotage that defied belief. They used mining charges to collapse tunnels filled with hegemony soldiers. They turned ore processing equipment into massive bombs. They even weaponized the planet's unstable geology, triggering rock slides that buried entire hegemony companies. But the most terrifying moment came when Barnes ran out of explosives. Zektar's forces had him cornered in the main processing plant. Nowhere to run, no weapons left, no hope of rescue. Barnes picked up a mining drill and charged, straight at a hegemony heavy trooper. The drill was a construction tool. It had no chance against military armor. Barnes knew this. His enemy knew this. Everyone watching knew this. But Barnes attacked anyway, and somehow the impossible happened. The drill found a joint in the armor. The heavy trooper fell. Barnes took the trooper's weapon and continued fighting. This pattern repeated across 12 star systems. Zektar told his students. Humans who should have surrendered instead found ways to keep fighting. They turned tools into weapons. They turned terrain into allies. They turned their own deaths into victory. He activated another recording. This one showed Major Susan Wright coordinating orbital defense platforms around the colony world of Haven. She was a career officer with an excellent service record, calm under pressure, logical in her decision-making. Then the orbital bombardment began. Zektar watched his younger self-order the attack on Haven's surface. Standard tactics designed to break enemy morale. The bombardment targeted military installations first, then infrastructure, then population centers. The recording showed Wright receiving reports as her world burned beneath her. Her face remained calm until her communications officer handed her a specific report. Her home city had been hit. Her family's neighborhood was gone. Any rational commander would be devastated, emotional, possibly compromised, enough to make tactical errors. Wright's response chilled Zektar to his core. "Good," she said, her voice steady as stone. "Now I do not have to worry about collateral damage." What followed was the most ruthless defensive action Zektar had ever witnessed. Wright used her orbital platforms like guided missiles, ramming them into hegemony ships with devastating effect. She turned the planet's communication satellites into bombs. She even used the debris from destroyed installations as ammunition for improvised MI-SS drivers. But it was the emergence of what humans called total war that truly horrified Zektar. On every world where fighting continued for more than a few days, the same pattern emerged. The line between soldier and civilian disappeared completely. Every human became a potential combatant. Every building became a fortress. Every tool became a weapon. On the agricultural world of New Harvest, a baker named Maria Santos used her knowledge of food distribution networks to poison an entire hegemony supply depot. She had no military training, no weapons. No combat experience. But she understood how food moved through a city, and she used that knowledge to kill 300. Enemy soldiers when captured. Santos showed no remorse. They came to our world, she told her interrogators. They thought we would just let them take it. They were wrong. Sitar paused the recordings. His students sat in stunned silence. Several looked pale. One was making notes furiously, as if trying to understand how such tactics could be countered. You cannot counter them, Zektar said, reading the young officer's mind. That is the lesson of the human hegemony war. You cannot defeat an enemy that refuses to be defeated. You cannot break the morale of creatures who become stronger when broken. You cannot calculate victory against species that redefine the meaning of victory itself. He looked around the room at faces that reminded him of his own younger self. Confident, certain, unaware of what war could become when fought against humans. The patterns we observed were not random, he continued. They were not the desperate actions of a dying species. They were the fundamental expression of human nature. When faced with extinction, humans do not accept their fate. They fight it. They rage against it. They die kicking and screaming and taking their enemies with them. Sub-Commander Veltok raised his tentacle again. Sir, how did the war end? If humans are as you describe, how did we achieve peace? Zektar smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. That, young officer, is tomorrow's lesson. Tonight, I want you to think about everything you have seen. Think about what it means to fight an enemy that treats death as just another weapon to be used against you. The students filed out quietly. Zektar remained at his desk, staring at the star map. 12 systems, hundreds of worlds, millions of casualties on both sides, and the humans had never stopped fighting. Not once, not even when defeat seemed certain. That was when he knew the hegemony had already lost. They just had not admitted it yet. The next day, Zektar faced his students again. They looked different now. The confidence had drained from their faces. Good. Confidence would get them killed if they ever fought humans. Today we discuss the Battle of Wolf 359, Zektar announced. The largest fleet engagement in hegemony history. The moment when we learned that winning battles against humans might be worse than losing them. He activated the tactical display. Wolf 359 appeared as a red dwarf star surrounded by empty space. Perfect location for a fleet engagement. No planets to complicate the battlefield. No civilians to worry about. Just ship against ship in the clean vacuum of space. Zektar had commanded the largest hegemony force ever assembled. 500 ships of all classes. Every type of weapon the hegemony had developed over 10,000 years of expansion. The finest crews in the galaxy against them stood the human fleet under Admiral Ryan Torres. 63 ships. Most of them converted civilian vessels. Some were so old they still used primitive fusion drives. On paper, it should not have been a battle. It should have been an execution. Intelligence indicated the human fleet was trapped. Zektar told his students. They had jumped into the system to escape pursuit, but suffered drive failures. No way out. No reinforcements coming. Standard procedure would be to offer terms for surrender. He remembered the moment clearly. His communications officer had opened a channel to the human flagship, the carrier Defiant. Admiral Torres appeared on screen. He was an older human with gray hair and tired eyes. The kind of leader who had seen too much war. Zektar had expected to negotiate. Perhaps the humans would trade information for safe passage for their civilian ships. Maybe they would offer to serve as forced labor in exchange for their lives. Reasonable terms that would save everyone unnecessary bloodshed. Torres had looked directly at Zektar through the communication link. When he spoke, his voice was calm, but there was something underneath it. Something that made Zektar's skin crawl. Surrender? Torres had said, Commander, we came here to fight. You wanted to see what humans are capable of when cornered? Today, you find out. The transmission cut. No negotiation. No discussion of terms. No rational consideration of the hopeless odds. Just a promise of violence. The battle began with standard fleet tactics. Zektar explained to his students. Long-range bombardment. Formation fighting. Everything we had trained for. The humans should have been destroyed in the opening exchange. The tactical display showed the first phase of the engagement. Hegemony ships moved in perfect formation. Weapons coordinated. Shields overlapping for maximum protection. Professional. Efficient. Unstoppable. The human response broke every rule of fleet combat. Instead of maintaining formation, individual. Human ships scattered across the battlefield. They engaged multiple hegemony vessels simultaneously. They used ramming tactics that no sane commander would attempt. They fought like each ship was independent, yet somehow they coordinated devastating. Combined attacks. Captain Nick Peterson commanded the destroyer Swift Strike. When his ship took critical damage and lost weapons, any rational commander would withdraw for repairs. Peterson did something else. He aimed his dying ship directly at the hegemony, Dreadnought Eternal Fist, and pushed his engines beyond their safety limits. The destroyer accelerated far past what its hull could handle. Structural failure was inevitable. Peterson rammed his ship into the Dreadnought at a velocity that turned both vessels into expanding clouds of debris. Suicide tactics. One of Zektar's students whispered. No, Zektar corrected. Sacrifice tactics. There is a difference. Peterson's ramming attack took out our most powerful ship and saved 3 human vessels that were under concentrated fire. He traded 1 ship for 4. In human mathematics, that was victory. The pattern repeated across the battlefield. Commander. Dana Hayes coordinated what humans called suicide runs, but were actually precisely calculated attacks, designed to inflict maximum damage while minimizing human losses. Her light cruiser squadron destroyed 6 hegemony ships while losing only 2 of their own. But it was the discovery of Protocol Omega that truly terrified Zektar. When human ships suffered critical damage, they did not attempt to save themselves. They activated something the humans called contingency protocols. Damaged ships became guided missiles. Escape pods were equipped with explosives. Even debris from destroyed vessels was somehow weaponized. The recording showed the moment Zektar realized what he was fighting against. A human supply ship had been crippled early in the battle. It was drifting, apparently helpless. Standard procedure would be to ignore it and focus on active threats. The supply ship suddenly accelerated toward a cluster of hegemony cruisers. Its cargo hold had been filled with mining charges. When it detonated, the explosion took out 3 ships and damaged 2 others. Every human vessel became a potential weapon. Zektar told his students. Not just their warships, their supply ships, their medical vessels, even their escape pods. They had weaponized their own evacuation procedures. The battle lasted 18 hours. By any measure, the hegemony won. The human fleet was completely destroyed. Admiral Torres died when his flagship exploded after ramming a hegemony battleship. Not a single human vessel survived, but victory felt like defeat. Zektar had started the battle with 500 ships. He ended it with fewer than 200 operational vessels. 60% of the finest fleet in hegemony history had been destroyed or crippled by a force 1/8 its size. The mathematics made no sense. The humans had lost every ship, but somehow they had won the battle. How is this possible? Sub-Commander Veltok asked. Our technology was superior. Our numbers were overwhelming. Our tactics were proven in thousands of engagements. Zektar nodded. All true. But you are thinking like a hegemony officer. You assume that both sides want to survive the battle. Humans do not share that assumption. He activated a final recording. It showed the last moments of the battle. The human flagship, Defiant, was breaking apart, its hull split by concentrated fire. Admiral Torres was still on the bridge, refusing evacuation. His final transmission was broadcasted on all frequencies. This is Admiral Torres to all human forces. Remember this day. Remember that we did not go quietly. Remember that when they came for our worlds, we made them pay for every inch. Make them remember us. The flagship exploded, taking with it the hegemony command ship that had moved too close for the kill. That was when I understood, Zektar told his students. We were not fighting a military force. We were fighting an idea. The idea that some things are worth dying for. The idea that defeat is only final if you accept it. The idea that even death can be victory if you take enough enemies with you. He looked around the room at young faces, struggling to comprehend what they had seen. We won the Battle of Wolf 359. We destroyed the human fleet completely. But we lost something more important. We lost the certainty that superior force guarantees victory. We learned that against humans, winning might cost more than losing. The room was silent. Outside, the peaceful stars continued their eternal dance, unaware of the nightmare that had played out in their light. Tomorrow, Zektar said quietly, we discuss why the hegemony chose peace. Why we decided that fighting humans was not worth the cost of victory. Why sometimes the wise choice is to stop fighting an enemy that refuses to be defeated. He dismissed his students and sat alone in the darkened room. 3 years later, he still wondered if humanity had lost the war, or if they had simply chosen to stop teaching the galaxy what they were capable of. Either way, he was grateful. He would never have to find out. On the final day of training, Zektar's students filed into the briefing room with different expressions than when they had started. The easy confidence was gone. In its place was something more valuable, respect, and a healthy dose of fear. Today we discuss why the war ended, Zektar announced. Why the mighty hegemony chose to make peace with a species we should have conquered in weeks. Why we learned that sometimes the strongest choice is to stop fighting. He activated the display. One last time, it showed casualty figures from the entire war. Human losses were staggering. Nearly 40 million dead. Entire colonies wiped out. Their home fleet reduced to scattered survivors. Hegemony losses were smaller by comparison. 13 million casualties. Significant, but not catastrophic for an empire spanning hundreds of worlds. By every measure, Zektar said, the hegemony was winning. Our technology remained superior. Our industrial capacity was untouched. Our core worlds were safe. Yet 6 months after Wolf 359, we sued for peace. Can anyone explain why? Sub-Commander Veltok raised a tentacle hesitantly. Sir, perhaps High Command calculated that final victory would cost more than it was worth. Closer, Zektar agreed. But not complete. The truth is more disturbing. He touched a control, and the display changed to show strategic analysis from the final months of the war. Despite their massive losses, human resistance was increasing, not decreasing. Every world the hegemony conquered required more troops to hold. Every victory led to more desperate human counterattacks. We were winning battles, Zektar explained, but we were losing the war. Each human world we took required a full brigade just to maintain control. Each human city we occupied became a center of resistance. We were conquering territory, but we were not conquering humans. The recordings showed the pattern. On occupied worlds, human civilians continued to fight using whatever they could find. Kitchen knives became weapons. Children carried messages between resistance cells. Elderly humans sabotaged supply lines with knowledge gained from decades of living in those cities. We calculated that complete victory would require occupation forces on every human world for at least 50 years. Zektar continued. Maybe. Longer. The hegemony would have to station half our military just to keep humans from fighting back. This was not conquest. This was becoming a permanent jailer for an entire species. But there was something else. Something that had haunted Zektar Z. Dreams for 3 years. We intercepted human communications during the final months, he said quietly. Messages between their surviving military commanders. They were not discussing surrender. They were discussing what they called Phase 2. The display showed translated fragments of human military communications, plans for asymmetric warfare, strategies for fighting from hidden bases, discussions of weapons that could be built from civilian materials. The humans were preparing for a war that could last centuries. They were planning to fight us forever, Zektar told his students. Not for years. Not for decades, forever. Each new generation would be raised to continue the fight. Each human child would grow up knowing that their life purpose was to kill hegemony soldiers. One of his students, a young intelligence officer named Caxter, looked confused. Sir, surely. This was desperation. Empty threats from a defeated enemy. Zektar shook his head. I thought the same thing. Then I studied human history. They had fought wars lasting centuries over pieces of land smaller than a single city. They had continued conflicts for generations over religious differences. They had fought each other with such intensity that they nearly destroyed their own world multiple times. The display showed human historical records, wars that lasted 30 years, conflicts that spanned continents, battles fought with primitive weapons but absolute determination. Humans had been perfecting the art of endless warfare for thousands of years before they ever met the hegemony. We were not fighting a military, Zektar said. We were fighting a culture, a way of thinking that treated defeat as temporary and death as just another weapon. We could have killed every human soldier, and they would have just trained new ones. We could have destroyed every human ship, and they would have built more from scrap metal. But the moment that changed everything came during the peace negotiations. Hegemony sent their finest diplomats to meet with the surviving human leadership. The negotiations were held on a neutral station in the border systems. Zektar had been there as a military advisor, expecting to dictate terms to a broken enemy. Instead, he met Admiral Kate Morrison. Morrison had lost her son at Wolf 359. Her homeworld had been bombarded during the early stages of the war. She had every reason to hate the hegemony and demand revenge. Instead, she did something that shocked everyone in the room. She offered alliance. Admiral Morrison understood something we did not, Zektar told his students. She understood that endless war serves no one. That victory means nothing if it destroys both sides. That true strength comes from choosing when to fight and when to stop fighting. The recording showed Morrison extending her hand to Zektar across the negotiation table. Her voice was steady, professional, but there was something in her eyes. Not defeat, not surrender. Understanding. The war is over, she had said. We both know you can probably destroy us if you keep fighting. But we also know it will cost you more than you can afford. So let us try something different. Let us be allies instead of enemies. It was the most radical proposal in hegemony history. Make peace with a species that had never stopped fighting. Trust creatures who had turned their own deaths into weapons. Work together with beings who thought defeat was just another word for temporary setback. High Command spent months debating the offer, Zektar continued. Some wanted to finish the war regardless of cost. Others wanted to try a different approach. In the end, practicality won. We signed the Treaty of Kepler Station. The treaty had been more than just a peace agreement. It established joint military protocols, shared technology development, combined training exercises. Within a year, human and hegemony forces were working together as if they had never been. Enemies. That, Sektar told his students, is the final lesson about humans. They are either your greatest enemy or your greatest ally. There is no middle ground. Any species capable of such total commitment to warfare is equally capable of total commitment to peace. A communication alert chimed on Sektar's desk. He glanced at the message and smiled for the first time in days. Speaking of allies, he said, we have just received a priority transmission from Admiral Morrison. He activated the message. Morrison's face appeared on the display, older now, but still sharp, still dangerous in her own way. Sektar, we have a situation in the Outer Rim, she said without preamble. New contact. Machine intelligence, calling itself the Devour Collective. They have consumed 3 star systems already. Completely sterilized. No survivors. Morrison's expression was grim, but determined. These things do not negotiate. They do not take prisoners. They just consume everything in their path and move on to the next system. We could use your help, old friend. Time to show these machines. What happens when they pick a fight with the living? The message ended. Sektar looked at his students, who were staring at the display in shock. And that, he said, is why we chose alliance over conquest. Because there are threats in the galaxy that require every species to work together. Threats that make our old war look like a minor disagreement. He touched his communication panel and opened a channel to Morrison. Admiral, this is Commander Sektar. The Third Fleet is at your disposal. We are powering up engines now. Try to leave some of them for us. Morrison's laughter came through the speakers. I make no promises, Commander, but we will see what we can do. Sektar turned back to his students. Class dismissed. Report to your ships. We have work to do. As the young officers filed out, chattering excitedly about their first joint operation with humans, Sektar remained at his desk. 3 years ago, he had been the hammer of worlds, conquering planets for the hegemony. Now he was about to fight beside the species that had taught him the true meaning of warfare. The irony was not lost on him. The humans had defeated him by refusing to be defeated. Now they would fight together against an enemy that knew only consumption and destruction. He stood and walked toward his ship. Time to show the Devourer Collective what happened when they threatened the living. Time to demonstrate what humans and hegemony forces could accomplish when they fought on the same side. Time to remind the galaxy that some alliances were forged in war and made stronger by peace.